if you know your history, can you point to a period in UK history, for example, where massively punishing rich people by massively taxing them has actually benefited the country?
Listen,
because I can't really.
My dad was born in 57. He worked for the post office, Royal Mail, 35 years. Never once earned more than the average wage in the country. He was able to buy a house, support a family. My parents are retired now. They own their own property. They're financially secure. That's not possible now. He lived in an era where the top rate of tax was much, much, much higher. The 50s, the 60s, the 70s in the UK, in the US, the top rate of tax on large estates was significantly higher. And in that time period, it's not a coincidence, ordinary people could afford to buy houses. They could afford to, listen, this is not normal, okay? Read your history, right? You read Charles Dickens? Charles Dickens? In this country we're talking right now, 150 years ago, ordinary men and women lived in desperate poverty, okay? That's gonna happen again.
Okay, so let's dissect all these idiotic, nonsensical arguments from Gary's bullshit economics about why his father was able to afford a house and why you can't do that today. Because according to Gary's bullshit argument or bullshit reason or whatever, we are not taxing the rich enough. Now, let's take his argument point by point. So he starts off by saying that back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the top marginal, the top marginal tax rate was higher than it is today. And it's true, both in the UK and the US, the top marginal tax rate was 90 to 91%. But, as we know, rich people, they don't like to pay taxes. So they use loopholes, they use deductions, they use lawyers to avoid paying those high tax rates. So the effective tax rate actually back like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s would have been at least 40 to 45%, not 90%. And of course, they only paid that on the top marginal tax rate is the highest percentage tax on income above a certain threshold. So if we calculate it by today's standards, adjusted for inflation, it's going to be anything earned above $1 million. So anything earned above $1 million, it's going to be taxed as 90%. This is back in the 60s, 70s, and the 50s. But of course, like I've said, the rich people, they use their ways to pay less, and that less is 40 to 45%. Now, the top marginal tax rate, both in the UK and the US, I think is something around 40 to 45%. So that means the effective tax rate is going to be something like 30 or 35. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's going to be like the range of the effective tax rate. So he's wrong about that. He's wrong about how much the rich were paying in taxes. Now that's number one. Number two, he says the reason why his father was able to afford a house is because, of course, the rich were paying more in taxes. And he couldn't be more wrong. Because if we want to understand why people were able, let's focus on the UK now. Why people, UK and the US, why people were able to afford a house, especially now in the UK, because we're talking about Gary Stevenson's father. Now, in the UK in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the demand for housing was less than it is today, partly because of immigration. There are more people in the UK now than they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Obviously, okay? So there was less demand. The second thing is that the money wasn't as broken as it is today. Now we know the dollar went off the gold standard in 1971. I mentioned that in my video, the greatest scam ever devised. You can watch it here. So the money wasn't broken and it wasn't super inflated as it is today. It wasn't super devalued, to say it better. Assets are super inflated, the money is super devalued. So the money wasn't super devalued, it wasn't broken as it is today. So there is less demand for housing. The money is actually good, it's not as broken as it is today, it's not super devalued. And there were less restrictions and less regulation on building new houses and new residential properties in the UK than they are today. So these are the three main reasons why Gary's father was able to afford a house and live a dignified life in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and why people today can't do that. First, because we went off the gold standard in 1971, and the money printing was going crazy since then. Governments have been printing money like there is no tomorrow. They just keep printing money and devaluing the currency. So that's the first reason. Second reason, there are more people now, thanks to immigration. The third reason is there are more regulation on building residential properties today than they were many years ago. So these are the reasons why Gary Stevenson's father was able to afford a house and afford a life and a family back then, and why people can't do it today. As for Charles Dickens, and Gary Stevenson likes to reference Charles Dickens so much, scaring people into going back to the abject poverty, the so-called abject poverty by today's standards that people were living in back in Charles Dickens' days. Let me ask you this. If we compare like the time of Charles Dickens, English people compared to other nations, let's say China or Africa or Eastern Europe or Russia, who do you think was richer? Was it England or Russia or China? It was absolutely England, because it was going through industrialization. So by the standards of that time, British people were not living in abject poverty. In fact, anyone who was living pre-industrial conditions was living in abject poverty by the standards of that time. Of course, if you compare the Charles Dickens days time with today's standards, of course they were poor by today's standards, but they were not poor by that time standards. They were actually one of the richest people in the world by that time standards. And that's not to mention that they were going through industrialization. In other words, their production was increasing. There are more goods and services because more efficient techniques have been produced thanks to industrialization. There is more market-driven innovation that allows for people to produce more and be more efficient. And that's what gave birth to the modern world and all the convenience that comes with it. So Gary Stevenson is not only an ignorant fool and an idiot when it comes to economics or Bitcoin, but he is also an idiot when it comes to comparing or understanding the economic situation of his own people 150 years ago. And he can't tell you why his father was able to afford a house. So how can you expect him to tell you what to do today? And how can you expect him to, how can you believe him and dismiss Bitcoin because this idiot who doesn't know anything about economics, who doesn't know anything about sound money, who doesn't know anything about how a proper economy functions, and who wants to tax the rich, and he thinks that taxing the rich is going to solve all problems and is going to allow you to afford a house and a living and a family or a Porsche, I don't know. I think Gary Stevenson, Gary's bullshit economics is dangerous nonsense. Okay? And he's getting a lot of time, both online and now on television, on Piers Morgan's or whatever the fuck is his name too. So yeah, Gary's economics is absolutely wrong about everything. He's wrong about economics, he's wrong about Bitcoin, he's wrong about why his father was able to afford a house, he's wrong about the economic condition of his own people back in Charles Dickens' days. He's wrong about everything. So why do people listen to him? Of course, I think he tickles people's emotions and, he tells them, oh, you deserve better. If we just tax the rich, it's the same old Marxist socialist nonsense. It's just in a new package, new branding. That's all what it is. So yeah, that's all I have to say in this video. I think that Gary Stevenson is an idiot. I think that Gary's bullshit economics is dangerous nonsense. And if you find any value, if you think his nonsense is dangerous, if you realized how stupid he is from watching this video, send this video to a friend or two. Make it known that Gary doesn't know jack shit about economics, and you shouldn't listen to him about neither economics nor Bitcoin nor anything else, or even trading, by the way. So yeah, that's all I have to say in this video. Let me guys know what you think in the comments below, and see you in the next one. Take care.